And again, I wasn't aware this was going to be published, so somebody's going to wonder, what in the world is that? But anyway. If it does, if in fact this beetle with its newfound genetic diversity is able to invade jack pine and then spread, that will have incredible economic consequences and social consequences. Remember, all of this driven by winter temperatures increasing a little bit. It's incredible. Okay, let's move to southern Ontario. I've waxed on this topic long enough. I think things here are much, much more complex. I've only been here for 4 months. But one of the things that I would say to you is climate change is happening here. Of course it is. It already has impacts. I'm sure of that. Everybody tells me how weird this past fall was and how dry the summer was and how bad the crops were. We've bought a little farm just between Maryhill and Eris, and my neighbors are all lamenting their poor corn crops and soybeans and whatnot. What we'll see is changes in temperature, changes in the precipitation regime. In other words, when we get precipitation, what form it will be in, how much will be there, how quickly it will run off, all the kinds of things that I talked about in BC. Insolation, how much sunlight, when's it coming, where is it coming, seasonal and so on. Those changes in climate will surely occur here. They might not be quite as dramatic in BC. I don't know what the projections are specifically, but I'm sure they will be occurring here. And what I wanted to show you is in the more northerly latitudes, I took this photo in the Yukon a couple of years ago when I was there. This shows the Salmon Glacier, which has its origins, if you're looking up and around the corner to the left, there's an enormous ice field there. But what I want you to see here, and again, I wish I had a laser pointer, do you see the scour on that mountainside? Completely unvegetated in the lower areas. And then the line of trees is almost at the top of the slide. That's the historical extent of ice. That's where the ice used to be, all the time. The lower is the more recent level of ice, and look where it is now. It's unbelievable. That quantity of water is no longer going during the summer periods into river systems to cool rivers to maintain flow levels. Just unbelievable. Climate change is real. It absolutely is. On top of that, though, in southern Ontario, there are people everywhere. Population pressure is enormous. And I believe that climate change pressures will be interacting with population pressures in this region in ways that are completely dissimilar to what I've just talked about in northern British Columbia. I do think that people require water. We change the water flow levels, and we have an expert here who will be talking about surface water. But whenever you create a road, you've created new rivers effectively by ditching. You've created hard surfaces, the water runs off, doesn't get absorbed, you have more flow. You create parking lots, exactly the same issues happen. So we're changing water flows, water balances all the time through our activities, and the more people there are, the more that will happen. The quality of water, the kinds of pollutants, the kinds of foreign substances, unnatural substances that enter water is also directly proportional to how many people there are and how much industry there is. Runoff, I talked about the distribution of wetlands, the drainage from wetlands. We try to reclaim lands. We try to drain them for agricultural purposes, for housing developments. Not sure that's a real good idea. Industry requires huge amounts of water. That's a given. When it's used, is it restored to the environment in reasonably clean condition? Air quality, transportation, issues in a densely populated area. One of my big adjustments to southern BC is Highway 401. That's an abomination. I can say it no other way than that. I understand how essential it is, but my goodness, It is never not busy. It's never not rush hour. Doesn't matter what time you're out there. It's just incredible. And you know, the industrial need for those transportation corridors is absolutely real. The human need for those transportation corridors is absolutely real. We have to get around, no question, absolutely. But boy, I'm not sure we're doing it in the most sensible or efficient ways. Urbanization. Urbanization is a huge issue. When I look at the Kitchener-Waterloo area, I wonder how much land has actually been developed over the last 30 years, say. How much acreage has actually been taken up by new housing developments? Be interesting to know that. What's the growth and what is the projection over the next 30 years? I'm sure you'll be talking about those things. Deforestation has taken place here in a remarkable way. 80% of the forests in this region are now gone relative to what was here in the 1800s. No surprise when you think of agriculture, transportation, housing, all of those factors. Huge. So, what do we do? Local responses. One of the things, and I know this is on your agenda, is urban intensification. If you can intensify, it's on my agenda at Laurier, how can you keep the university from spilling out and growing? I mean, it's a growing institution. It's grown absolutely rapidly. How can you keep that impact, that footprint, relatively small? Because one of the strengths of Laurier is the small footprint, the intimacy of that campus, the ability of students and faculty members to interact in a compact area. The same is true, of course, of municipal governments, of housing developments. How can you intensify and create environments that have a certain quality of life, great places to live, but where you get people living closer together? It sounds like a conundrum. I think it's an important conundrum to try and solve. By intensifying urban areas, what we're really doing is leaving more non-urban areas, and those are the natural environments that I think actually sustain us. I think it's also important to think about maintaining biodiversity. I talked about the importance of genetic issues, pests, climate change, ecological release, and so on. I'm absolutely convinced that biodiversity is a huge, huge part of ecological resiliency. In other words, when systems are resilient, they can withstand insults or perturbations. The reason they can withstand them is because there's lots of diversity. If there's little diversity and one organism manages to penetrate the defenses of that low diversity, then you really end up with a lot of difficulty. So in agriculture, we see increasingly crops that are all genetically homogeneous. I worry about that. In horticulture, we see the same. How many species or varieties of roses are there, for example? And how genetically uniform is any of those varieties? Silviculture, trees, viticulture, grapes, any kind of culture, we really need to think about trying to maintain a high level of diversity. I think it's hugely important. Increasing mass transportation, I think, is absolutely essential. In other words, if we're going to need more transportation in this region, absolutely. But instead of putting another lane on the 401, why don't we put a train track? Just put it right there. Wouldn't that be better? I know that there are lots of political, other challenges, economic challenges, but this really is a huge issue in this region, I believe. Clearly, we also need to try to reduce energy use. Energy use is one of the drivers, obviously, of climate change, particularly fossil fuels. If you use green material, in other words, if you're burning wood, it's not nearly as big an issue as if you're taking fossil fuels and re-liberating carbon that had been sequestered from generations, eons, back into the atmosphere. That changes the dynamic in a huge way.